Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of On the Border with Sheriff Lamb, brought to you by FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. And we're grateful to have another awesome guest today. A good friend of mine, Sheriff Jim Ott from Blair County, Pennsylvania. He has been in law enforcement for 31 years now and just finishing up his second term, getting ready to run for his third term or running for his third term.
I am.
And we're going to talk a little bit about some of what brought us together. Obviously, just being sheriffs and loving this profession and just being engaged in all the problems in our communities brought us together. But we're going to talk a little bit more about what really brought us together. So, Jim, thank you for being on here today.
Appreciate you having me.
Well,
That's my honor.
now, today we were on the Hill all day, right?
We were all over the place. Everybody has rubber band legs.
How did it go today on the Hill?
I think great. We received really well, a bipartisan reception for most. For us, it was. We had good interaction. Now, we take it from that conversation today. Let's see if the actions that back up their actions.
What are you saying? Politicians don't always do what they say?
Yeah, I'm saying sometimes lip service works and sometimes it don't. So.
Well, we appreciated you coming out here and doing that. I know it was a long day, a lot of walking back and forth, a lot of congressmen and senators to visit.
Yeah, no, you know what? It was great. Great being part of this and fantastic to see from all over the United States, everybody coming together and working for such an effort.
Now, sometimes people will ask this question. We're talking about border, we talk about immigration, and a lot of times I think people understand it a little bit better now, but they might say, why Pennsylvania? Why is a sheriff from Pennsylvania out here in D.C. talking to members of Congress and Senate about immigration or border security?
Sure. So I think what people sometimes get disconnected on, everybody thinks border, well, it's strictly at the border. What they don't realize is what crosses that border filters into the rest of the United States. Pennsylvania is a border. If you go to the northern part of Pennsylvania, that borders parts of Canada. You run across Lake Erie, you're in Canada. A lot of times that's mistaken as well. So our northern borders are also concerning, but we reap the poison that comes across the border. We reap the violence that comes across the border. The trafficking that comes across the border still makes it to Pennsylvania, makes it to all the states.
What type of increase or what has been the change from your first term, now your second term? Was there a difference in what you saw as it related to immigration, border security?
Sure. So obviously we saw the last 4 years the change and taking apart or putting us backwards from where we were. We lost ground. So because of that, we now see all across the United States, including Pennsylvania, where we see the increase in the fentanyl. So we have that poison coming through the community. We see our trafficking, human trafficking, our illegal immigrants. We're dealing with all of that regularly in all the communities. So you're seeing that. So that's the example whenever we talk about what changed and how much did it really affect when we made the moves that were made in the last administration. That's what comes out of it. And we're now dealing with those effects. Moving forward, we can't just move and build greater. We have to get caught up first and then build from there, then build greater. So it just put us backwards.
Now, I know you're not close to Philadelphia, right? Closer to Pittsburgh than Philadelphia?
I'm right in between.
Right in between.
So I have that network that travels back and forth, the same with Baltimore. So I'm right there.
But I'm sure you've been down to Kensington, right?
Oh, yeah.
For anybody that's not listening, I mean, give us a visual of what Kensington looks like. Because I think Kensington really is, if you wanted to see the effects of fentanyl in a community, and I know we're going to talk a little bit deeper about that, but if you wanted to see the effects of fentanyl, which they say that over 50% of all the illegal drugs in the country come through Arizona's borders, which ultimately ends up in places like Pennsylvania, places like Philadelphia. What's it like when you get down into Philly and down onto Kensington?
Oh, it looks like you're in another world. The drugs just blatant out in public. The homelessness, the drugs, the addicts laying on the street. Again, it looks like a disaster or something happened, or almost something from a movie. You wouldn't expect to think in our lifetime we would see this. And unfortunately, it doesn't stay there. So we're seeing it further and further into our communities that's traveling and coming, even into our homeless now is increasing. Our drug problems are big, and law enforcement, not just the sheriff's office, all law enforcement are working hard every day to try to combat that. But we're working in the negative, and we're always chasing.
Yeah, that's right. And look, it's not just, I don't want to pick on Philly because it happens in Phoenix. It's happening everywhere across the country. Matter of fact, Phoenix, I think, has the highest drug usage for a big city, a major city. We have those pockets too, but you're right though. I mean, even though I've seen it, it was really staggering to see it on Kensington. I just think it's a microcosm of it. It is right in your face, and it is all up and down that roadway.
It is. So our drug programs, when you're becoming a DRE, they're the areas that they go to test individuals, and because they know it's where you're going to find it, and you're going to have somewhat cooperation. They work with them to go through some of the tests that they're going to run through. But again, it reminds you of something out of a movie that it's hard to explain.
Now, you and I share a mutual disdain for fentanyl, and we've, I know this is a emotional subject for you. I had a son who struggled with addiction, ultimately got cleaned up, and ended up dying at the hands of somebody who was driving under the influence of alcohol and marijuana. What drives your passion to fight against fentanyl and drugs coming into this country?
So similar story to yours. I lost a son to drug addiction. So and mine, unfortunately, couldn't get clean. We tried 20 years of an addiction, rehab, arrested him 4 of the 6 times he went to jail was on my dime. And the times that I would tell him, look, I love you, but I hate who you became. I never stopped loving him, but I couldn't get him out of it. So it didn't justify when he went out to buy heroin, thinking he bought heroin, when in fact he bought fentanyl. And so the dosage of fentanyl that he took on that last fix was his final overdose. So difficult. I argue with people all the time that say that it doesn't affect the communities it does. I argue with people all the time when they tell you that our marijuana and our alcohol are not gateways. They are. They absolutely are. I lived it. I watched it. We tried the tough love. We tried every level that could be to try and save him, and it just couldn't happen because he had to do it. I mean, he had to beat the addiction. So the biggest point to that, and you and I both face it, it's not prejudicial. So addiction's not prejudicial.
Yeah.
The problem that we have is that we've allowed a poison because of the breakdown of our security. We've allowed a poison to come into our communities and flood our communities at a rate that we can't control. We're slowly trying to gain ground on it, but look where we're at with it. And the amount of lives that have been lost. So that's where I say, while I'm not on the border per se, the southern border, I am feeling the effects of the border.
Yeah, that's absolutely intertwined. The two come together. The cartels are trafficking humans into this country, but their business for decades has been trafficking drugs. They didn't stop doing that. The two are going hand in hand. And this is why FAIR has been so involved in dealing with policy and shining a light on the problems with, where we are in this country with border security, immigration. You're a father like me who's struggled, had a son or a child struggle with this, like so many other families. Now you see this change. Do you have hope with what you're seeing coming out of Washington now, with your meetings today, with what you're seeing from the changeover in the presidency, the executive orders? Is that giving you some hope that we can get this ship back on course?
So I would say that if there was never a better climate than what we have today to try and make that progress, ultimately this comes down to our elected officials and our leaders that we've put in position to do what's right. And I've said this in the previous campaign for a candidate that ran for Senate, and I supported him, and I shared my story and his battle. He was one of the ones we spoke with today. His battle to get into his position was that everything that FAIR stands for was what he stood a platform on, and I reminded him of that, and I believe he will. But in that campaign, I also said we've put leaders in places trusting, and an amazing amount of trust for everybody. And when that trust is broken, when they don't do what's right, where I would even go further to say, if it was put in your family, what would you do? And if you don't take those steps for whatever reason, because you're siding with one reason or another to veer away from it, put yourself in somebody else's shoes of a family that it's going to come into their home and it's going to place an effect, a devastating effect on that family. And if it was your family, how would you react? What tools would you give? What tools would you give our elected officials? What tools would you give our men and women that are on the border, the men and women that are out on the street trying to combat this? And what programs are you going to put out to try and help these families? Put it back in your family, and how would you react?
Yeah. And you're so right. This is going to fall on the shoulders of the elected officials.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing a lot of action from CBP or from ICE and the federal government in the removal process, the deportation process? Are you seeing a lot of that in Pennsylvania right now?
So in some areas, yes. In some of the, like my area, I haven't seen a lot of. We have some agricultural areas that use immigrants to come in and work, and they so far seem to be the property owners, the landowners have went through the rigorous challenges that they go through to try and get them here legally. But for some of the communities, I talked to some of the other sheriffs, they've had the phone calls. One of the frustrating things, and again, I think everybody's trying to learn their place, or they're trying to learn the rhythm. So trying to get communication out. And we've said, like, you're coming into our community and our constituents the first person they call is the sheriff. Hey, what's going on? And when the sheriff doesn't know, and the communication wasn't there to say, hey, this is what we're going to do, or this is what was done, that's caused a little bit of a barrier. But we're working through it and having meetings with them. And a few weeks ago, we were at the Winter National, and out when topic was brought up. And so again, because everything's happened at such high speed, so to speak, with President Trump really taking a focus on and backing up what he said he was going to do. So now we're trying to learn the pace, the steps, and the communication that needs to go with it, so that we can continue to make it smooth and just work together.
Well, I tell you what, from a sheriff from Arizona, I appreciate seeing other sheriffs being part of this conversation, because it is what happens in our backyard today is in your front yard tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And so I love that you've been here, being a voice for it. Thank you for sharing your personal story with us as well as to what drives you and kind of keeps you active in this. And thanks for being part of FAIR today and coming out and speaking on behalf of immigration and border security to many of these folks here in DC on the Hill.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's certainly my honor. Then again, you and I, from shortly after the day we met, have shared stories and talked. And again, and I've said to you, I've built a friendship on a sad note of how we got there, but a connection that not everybody has. However, it is a drive. It is a passion. And again, it's an honor, and if we can help one family out there. I know that when this story come out with my tragedy, there are many out there.
Right.
And so when that came out this past fall with some things I was working on and started to air across our state, I had calls from people that had no idea who they were. And they were fathers and mothers that were just devastated and didn't know where to go. And I said, look, they would call and I would call them back. I don't know them. I took the time to talk to them, give them some directions or some thoughts I had. And ultimately at the end of it, I prayed with them.
That's awesome.
And I said, I can't end this call out praying with you. And I can tell you the only reason I'm still here today, over several of the tragedies that happened, was because I put God first, and I was able to turn things over to him and let him keep me here. That's the only reason I'm here today.
Well, I can tell you, Jim, we need more sheriffs like you in this country.
We have sheriffs like me.
We
in this
do.
country.
There are a lot. And
The community just don't realize it.
amen to that. That's a well said, Will's point. Jim, thank you so much for coming out here today. And folks, thank you for joining us on another episode of On the Border with Sheriff Lamb. We'll see you next time.